Coming towards this hall, it was like entering a pure land. All the sounds of mantras resounding all around. All sounds a mantra. So, of course, this is being broadcast live, and so Sunma Eileen put on our Facebook, who is listening to this? And so we got replies from California, Denmark, Indonesia, France, London, Tel Aviv, Brazil, Puerto Rico, Croatia, Nepal, Mexico, Canada, South Africa, Switzerland, and Holland. Yeah, but this is that you don't need people that replied to her email. So we don't know who is listening.
More from Miami and Germany, and I heard a few others.
Okay, so the wonders of technology, they are good things in technology also. So we will finish up this morning. The supreme inspiration is enemies, hindrances, disease, and suffering. Now, this is a very important verse, because normally when we suffer reverses in our life, when we experience people who are a problem for us, which is called here the enemy, when we have hindrances and obstacles, when we get sick, and in general when we are suffering, we feel defeated. We feel, let down, and if we're not careful, we begin to become very turned in on our own suffering, our own problems. It all seems too much. And we can even develop a kind of victim mentality. Poor me, oh look, it's so hard, all my bad karma. Or either if we're at least a little bit ahead, we say our bad karma. If not, we blame everybody else. It's all their fault, not me. And so suffering is a double-edged sword. It can cut through a lot of our obscurations, or it can create more obscurations. And so as I said yesterday, a lot of the Lojong teachings is on how to take difficulties onto the path, to make those difficulties into the path. So this is a really very, very important thing, which we all need to really think about. Because when things go well, when things are smooth, when everything falls into place nicely the way I want them to go, then we consider that is the ideal time to practice. We gallop along, the Bodhisattva path, leaping from bhumi to bhumi. And it's all very lovely. But then something goes wrong. We discover we're really very sick, or we run into problems with other people, or there are obstacles that we cannot fulfill what we want to happen. It doesn't happen the way we want it, and everything falls apart. And so then, really, this is when we know where we are really at. It's not when everything is going smoothly. Then we can be little bodhisattvas. It's when things are not going smoothly, when things are not the way we want them to be. Maybe we had a very difficult time in our lives before. Now, we're looking into the future. It all looks very, very difficult. And this is where we really understand whether or not we really have Dharma in our heart, or whether it is just something which intellectually we ascribe to. Yes, that sounds really good. Yes, yes, I agree with all that. Yes, yes, that makes sense. Yes, yes. But then when something, as the Americans say, when the spit hits the fan, that's when we know whether or not we really have Dharma in our hearts. And so, therefore, instead of resenting difficulties, it's not that we have to go out and invite difficulties. Sit here, they will come. But when they come, how do we respond? This is what shows whether or not we really have understood the Dharma, whether we have really brought the Dharma into our lives and integrated our mind with the Dharma or not. Because it's true that, these two things. First of all, whether or not we can respond skillfully to difficulties, and at the same time, if we can even welcome the difficulties when they come, because this is what is going to make us really strong on the path. Because normally in our lives we are caught up between our hopes and fears. We hope everything's going to go okay, and we're anxious and worried that it won't go okay. So we're always caught between these two, and that creates stress and anxiety. And then we welcome it when everything goes fine, and we resent it and get upset and feel defeated when things don't go right. And so then that is not really taking everything onto the path. This whole question of learning how to take everything which happens to us as a learning process is very important, because if we really understand that, then we can relax. Because we know that whatever happens, we will deal with it. And we will learn from it. And we are not here just to have a good time. And we are not here just to make samsara more comfortable. We are here to learn, to develop, to transform. And the reason why in the Buddhist way of thinking, the higher celestial realms where everything is super pleasurable is regarded as a spiritual dead end, is exactly because there's no challenge. We dealt with this yesterday, but he brings it up here, so we deal with it again because it's really very, very important. We intellectually assent to it, but then when something really awful happens, we think, oh, well, it's all right for other people to practice, but for me, this is too much. And so it's this whole question of taking everything and helping it to deepen our practice. What can we learn from enemies, for example? Let's get specific. What can we learn from people who we feel are opposed to us? People either on a national level or a personal level who we find difficult. Exactly. Compassion, patience, understanding. Where are they coming from that they act like this?
Ignorance and suffering.
Yes. And so we can think, well, if somebody does something really bad to us, would we want to be that person? And normally we'd say, no, I wouldn't want a mind which would do that sort of thing or say that sort of thing. And so then we can think, how awful to be trapped in a mind which thinks that doing like that is okay. We wouldn't want that. So then naturally compassion comes. Right? We can learn from the things which people do, which we think, that's a bad thing to do. Well, we can be careful, first of all, we don't do that. Right? If we think it's not right, then make sure we don't do that. Not just if you think that's something wrong, well then I'm justified in doing the same wrong thing back again. Isn't it? You know, when somebody does something or says something which we don't like, we disapprove of, be careful we don't do the same thing. And recognize that they are acting because they are deluded. And so, therefore, the natural reaction would be not a superior compassion. You know, genuine compassion, compassione, means to suffer with somebody. It's different from pity. Pity gives, I don't know in Hebrew, but in English, it gives the idea of somebody superior looking down on somebody. Oh, poor little thing. Yes, patronizing, exactly that. So that's not what we're talking about. That we're superior and they're inferior, therefore we feel sorry for them because they're just stupid. It's an opening the heart to feel their suffering, which would cause them to act or speak in the way they have acted and spoken. So it's an empathy. It's a reaching out our heart to them and recognizing that what they are doing, we have also within ourselves. We could also act like that. We are not so superior. And therefore we have to be careful. So in this way, people who are difficult for us are exactly our helpers on the path. And this is why in the Lojong teachings it is said that, you know, one places one's enemy, one's opponent, on the top of one's head. That means to show great respect. Because they are teaching us a lot if we can only open up to hear their message. So rather than thinking that, you know, we can only practice when people do and say and act exactly how we would like them to be, we have to appreciate that the people we really can make progress on the path with are those people who are difficult. Because first of all, they show us our tender points, right? Because they're digging at it. And at the same time, we can watch our mind, how it reacts. And if we react by being angry, upset, frustrated, revengeful, then again we recognize that, we accept that, and then we say, good, now I understand these are my natural reactions. How am I going to work on this? If, as I said, if people don't push our buttons, we don't know we've got buttons to be pushed. And that is a failure. So we need to know which parts we need to work on. And so people who are difficult for us are helping us. Do you understand? you know. So therefore, instead of being resentful of people who are difficult, we can be grateful. It doesn't mean, as I say, that one has to put up with people cheating and being abusive and so forth. But one can be very strong, you know, and stand up for oneself. But one does it not from an attitude of anger or revenge or resentment, but from an understanding that the situation is not good for them as well as not good for us. So these enemies, meaning people who are in any way we have a problem with, actually are very helpful for us, very useful. How can we use them? They are our teachers. They are holding up a mirror. So far from resenting that, we should be grateful. I mean, as I say, it's not that we invite people to be difficult and mean and so forth, but when this happens, which is always going to happen in everybody's life, sometimes more than others, we should really look upon this as our opportunity, an opportunity to really, really look into our own hearts and really practice properly. And likewise, what's his next problem? Hindrances, obstacles. You know, one time I went to this Lama, and very traditional Lama, and I was going on to him about all my various obstacles. And he said, yes, well, if you say obstacles, they're obstacles. If you say opportunities, they're opportunities. I mean, I mentioned he was a traditional Lama because it sounds very New Age. But this is the point, that all our obstacles, all our difficulties are an opportunity to learn and to look at our mind and to really question what is our mind doing when we have difficulties arising in our life. Why is it that we always want things to go so smoothly? Because when nothing wrong with things going smoothly, when things go smoothly, that's very nice. We don't have to go out and look for obstacles. But nonetheless, our inherent idea that everything should go smoothly, and then we can practice, and that when difficulties come, that somehow or other we can't practice, that somehow it's an obstacle to our practice. This is where we're making the mistake. Because then we are fair weather practitioners. When the sun's shining, we blossom. And when the rains and storms come, we all close in and start feeling sorry for ourselves. So, as I said, the obstacles are what make us strong. The challenges are what give us our spiritual muscles, so that whatever happens to us, we can deal with this skillfully. We can respond in a way which will take us forward. And at the same time, we can look and see, how is our mind responding to this? Are we getting all depressed and unhappy and resentful and either blaming others or blaming ourselves? Or are we saying, okay, now how do we move forward with this? Because, this is how we really walk on the path. I mean, right now, as I said, all of these ideas are for the ideal, right? What we are aspiring to. Right now, we are at the best baby bodhisattvas. And so our legs are not very strong. And so we do keep falling down. And it's very wobbly. But, like every baby, slowly, slowly, get stronger and stronger, more confident. However many times we fall down, we pull ourselves back up again. And step by step by step, we go forward. So this is the point. I mean, it doesn't help to, flagellate. I don't know, in Judaism you probably don't do it, but in certain traditions, in Hinduism and Christianity and others, maybe Islam also, they beat themselves as a sign of contrition, of their sense of guilt and unworthiness. We're not doing that, right? We're not beating ourselves up because we can't always, reach the levels which are being shown to us. Like a little baby, it can't run a marathon, right? But the baby doesn't feel bad about that. It knows if it keeps going, eventually it could. It doesn't give up, or it doesn't sit there feeling bad about itself because it can't run. The very fact it can stand up and take a few wobbly steps before falling down is a great achievement already. So this is the point. As baby bodhisattvas, we are going to make mistakes. We are not going to reach the heights of an 8th level bodhisattva, but we're going to keep walking and not give up. So likewise, when difficulties come in our life, when obstacles come, all right, we feel sorry, we resent them, we wish those obstacles would go away. That's our first reaction. Second reaction is, okay, well, then what can I do with this situation? How can I use this situation, right? The texts say we have to use everything, take it on the path. Okay, how can I do that? And then we think it through. Sometimes we have to move away from that situation. Sometimes we can stay in the situation and work with it. We have to use our common sense also. But the essential thing is that we welcome everything and work out how we can use this. Somebody said that life is like a schoolroom. We're here to learn. And as in any classroom, if the lessons are too easy, then we get bored. We need lessons which stretch our minds. So likewise, in our life, we need things which stretch us beyond what we think we are capable of. That's how we grow strong. Somebody also said that life is the gymnasium of the soul. So if you think of soul as mind, it's true, as our whole spirit. This is where we stretch and exercise. We don't just lie around, so to say. So therefore, this whole teaching on how to take everything onto the path, everything is usable. Nothing needs to be discarded. We can make use of everything. It is very important in our lives. So he does inspiration. Inspiration means it inspires us to go forward, become strong, believe in our capacity to deal with situations, all situations, with more skill, more compassion. As we do it, we get that sense of, it's like, indeed, like exercising. At first you can only do this much, and then gradually we get the strength to do more and more and more. So that inspires us. We start small and then we work up. So disease, sickness, again, when we are sick, we can feel sorry for ourselves. poor me. Or we can say, okay, how can I use this on the path? And as many of you know, often in the Tibetan tradition, if one is sick, one practices Tonglen, which is the practice of taking in the sickness and giving out health and well-being and happiness. So, for example, if one has a certain sickness at any time, even a headache, to cancer, to anything, then one would visualize taking in all of the dark energy of all the beings in the world who are suffering in the way that one is suffering, whatever it is. And that one is taking in all their sickness and the causes of their sickness. And that then with the breath going out lives all our inherent good health and well-being and all the causes of that which come from our infinite Buddha nature. And so that they are healed and one takes on their sickness onto oneself. So in this way, instead of lying there feeling sorry for ourselves, we are doing a very important practice for hitting at our self-cherishing mind and at the same time developing this unconditional compassion. So, and also if one is sick, then one can think, well, this is the result of some negative karma, and by practicing and not being too upset about it all, then one is purifying that karma. So this is a good thing. One doesn't have to deal with that one again. We can next one, but not that one. So in this way, many practitioners, indeed, when they are sick and people ask them what practices they're doing, they often say Tonglen, because this practice of using one's sickness as a method to really cultivate genuine compassion. Compassion, as I said, is suffering with others. So imagining that how wonderful if one could take all the suffering of other beings and give them out well-being, and I alone can suffer, that's no problem. I will be their substitute. I will be their representative. I will take all the suffering on myself and leave them with a good health, and may they be cured of their suffering. Let me have it all. This is a very powerful practice, because normally we are thinking only of how we can overcome our sickness. So instead of that, to be open up to recognizing, first of all, that so many other people also are suffering, often without the help that we are going to get when we are in pain. And wishing from the depths of one's heart that one could take all that on oneself and leave them in good health and freedom from their troubles. How wonderful that would be. Then one would be happy to suffer if one knew that others were being freed. So this is also a very skillful way to deal with our tendency towards self-absorption and self-pity when we're ill. To make use of it again. To help others, but it's also to help us to break down this our own self-concern and self-cherishing mind. The ego, which says, well, I'm sorry others are sick, but I don't want to be sick. So all of these are things that when they happen, instead of thinking that they're an obstacle, we use them to help us to cultivate the path. So, any suffering which comes to us. Suffering, the Buddha defined as being, first of all, of course, birth, old age, sickness, death, which for many people is a suffering. I mean, birth is a suffering for the mother, and children, when they are just born, are not laughing, they're all crying. Old age, sickness, death. But he also said, not getting what we want and getting what we don't want. This he defined as suffering. And so for most of us, this is how it is. We get old, we get sick, we eventually die. So from the ego's point of view, this is all suffering. Getting what we don't want, not getting what we do want. The ego again says, oh, poor me. So, taking all that on the path. Actually, as the Buddha said, there are two kinds of suffering. There's physical suffering and there's mental suffering. Now, physical suffering we cannot avoid at some point. Where usually, if we don't die young, then we get old and we get sick, eventually we die. That is natural. Can't help that. But what we can deal with is mental suffering. Just because we are physically suffering does not mean that we need to be mentally suffering. They are two different things. And often we think they're the same thing. If I'm suffering physically, I must be suffering mentally. But this is not true. We can be suffering physically and our minds are perfectly at peace. And so, as I say, of course we try to keep ourselves healthy, but, the body has its own agenda. Nonetheless, what we can deal with is our response to our physical suffering. The mental. How is the mind responding? And that we work on it so that the mind, under all circumstances, is cheerful and at peace. This is possible. This is very possible. In fact, many people, around the world, in the face of enormous suffering and obstacles, find an inner sense of joy and compassion which just arises, which would never have come had they not been suffering so much. And so then they end up feeling grateful for that. At the time it was hard, but looking back, many people, you get to a certain age, and you look back and you can see that often the times of most stress, most difficulties, actually was when one learnt the most. And although one would not wish that on others, nonetheless it was indeed a period of maturation, of growing up. And so we should not wish for a life completely devoid of any challenges. When they come, what we should wish for is the inner strength and wisdom to deal with them intelligently and take everything on the path. That we should pray for. That we can take everything onto the path. But we shouldn't want that everything should go the way the ego thinks it should be going. Because if it does, then that's very nice, but we haven't learnt much. So it says here the supreme method is to be natural. Yeah, basically it means that as I said, I cannot read the mind of Palden Athisha, but Chichu means indeed being artificial and contrived. And so he's saying the tap means upaya. So it means the skillful means, the method, is not to be artificial, not to pretend, really, but to be chuchamepa, to be natural. So exactly what he's talking about here, I'm not sure, but here what is relevant for us is that when we are engaged in a spiritual path, and we read the various instructions and precepts and ideals of what we are aspiring towards, it is very easy, it is very tempting to pretend to others or ourselves, and both, to be much more spiritually advanced than we actually are. Because we know how we should be. It keeps telling us, right? And so therefore we sincerely try to be like that, which is good. I mean, we're trying to be patient when things are difficult, and that's a good thing. Even if we're not really feeling very happy inside, we're trying. That's one thing. It doesn't mean that we just never have to try and change. But it means that we shouldn't nonetheless pretend more than we are. Yes, we're aspiring to change, but nonetheless, at least to ourselves, we should be honest. This, is especially noticeable, of course, here you are within your society, but when people go to Nepal and to India and they are engaged with Tibetan society, or in any Asian country, when you are studying Buddhism in that Asian country, then of course that country how can I say it? When I first met my Lama, he said, please understand that Tibetan Buddhism is half Tibetan culture and half Buddhism. So you can throw out the culture, just don't throw out the Dharma. But of course, it is not like Dharma is here, culture is here. It's like this. So for Tibetans and for many people coming to the Tibetan tradition, it's sometimes difficult to know what is Tibetan culture just and what is genuine Dharma. So therefore, many people, because the culture side is more obvious, people, the lamas themselves sometimes don't know, especially if they haven't been to the West. They also sometimes get a little bit, they don't see the distinction. And so people start to find themselves training to become good Tibetans. Which isn't the point. Of course, when one is living within a culture, one respects that culture, and that's cultural norms. And when we know what is polite within that culture, then we will adopt that, because, this is what is polite. And we want to, not be considered barbarians. So we learn how to assimilate ourselves within that culture. But nonetheless, it's very important to remember that we are who we are. We are not Tibetans, and there's no particular advantage in becoming a Tibetan rather than becoming a good Israeli, for example, right? So what we're trying to do is to be true to ourselves in a positive way, and not pretend to be something that we're not, both culturally and spiritually. Do you understand? Is this making sense? Right? So therefore we should be natural. As I say, that doesn't mean that we don't aspire to improve. But we should understand the improvement is an inner improvement. It's not just a matter of pretending to be something that we're not. And so I think this question of, the method, the way of being is to be true to ourselves and to be natural and not to try to be something that we're not, while at the same time, of course, we are doing everything to look into our own mind and understand our weak points and our strong points, and to slowly change and transform ourselves. But it's while at the same time. I mean, one sees a lot, especially when people first come to the Dharma. And especially when they take ordination and become monks and nuns, then they often become quite strange. For a bit. Then eventually they relax into the role. But in the beginning, because, you study all the books on how to be, a good monk or nun, and then people are trying desperately hard to do it all right. And so they end up being very uptight and serious and very meticulous about every rule and so forth. And so they're not being natural. On the other hand, obviously, also natural doesn't just mean that you flop out. One has to, as I say, one is practicing, but within a certain inner truthfulness, assessing one's own self and one's own potential without trying to be someone we're not. That makes sense?
Can you still eat momos?
Only vegetarian.
I also understood something in addition when it was saying that.
Yes.
I understood that when he was saying the supreme method is to be natural, I mean, he was also kind of, in a sense, repeating what he's already said in that the true Buddha nature, i.e. the supreme method is actually to... Our normal selves in everyday life is not being natural because we've got all these covers over. But so the whole of the Buddhist of the Dharma path is to try to be natural, i.e. to try to get to that real sense.
Exactly, that's also very, very true. Yes, that how we act in everyday life is already artificial. It's covering up our true nature. And in the text on meditation, there is a lot of emphasis on spontaneity. But spontaneity coming from a deep, pure source, not spontaneity based on all our negative emotions. So then if we are really in touch with our true nature, then actually we don't need to go then, if we are really in touch with our true nature, we don't need to apprise whether something is positive or negative. It naturally will come out spontaneously very perfect. Other people will see it as very perfect, but from our side, it's just a spontaneous arising from the nature of the mind, which is very pure. And so then one is natural. I think when one meets very, very great beings, one feels that they are totally uncontrived. They are totally, uncontrived is exactly what this is saying, Chichomepa. Chicho means to be contrived, made up, kind of artificial. So, when we are really in touch with our true nature, then it just, this is why also many very advanced spiritual people are very playful. They're not serious and standing on their dignity and look at me, I'm a big, important person. Again, like His Holiness, because His Holiness, you will know him, so he demonstrates this. But many other masters also, they're very light-hearted and playful and sweet and like children almost. Intelligent children. Not kind of type children, but they're kind of innocent playfulness, which just manifests from their nature. So yes, indeed. I mean, this is ultimately what he's talking about, is that we should develop that quality, but that can only come when we really are in contact with our true nature. Then it's nice to know that our true nature is playful. Our true nature doesn't take itself seriously. I'm a true nature. Yes, exactly. I mean, I think that when one meets great masters, whole, because they're so integrated, but holy, no, they're too much fun for that. And so that quality of lightheartedness, along with great depth and profundity, is a manifestation of our true nature. So this is very important for us to remember. This is what we're trying towards. We're moving towards being more inherently natural. And true nature is very kind and cheerful, but compassionate. So these next two are fairly obvious. The supreme way of benefiting is to help others to enter the Dharma. So, of course, nowadays, Buddhism is no longer, fortunately, a missionary religion. We don't have to go around knocking on people's doors and handing them pamphlets. There are many ways to encourage people to be interested in Dharma. There are obvious ways. In Asia, most Dharma books which are published are given for free distribution. One of the ways that ordinary people feel that they are supporting the Dharma is to contribute to having Dharma books published. And so if you go to any temple or Dharma center, then you will see many books, and some really very excellent books, which are put there, and people can just take. If they want to make a donation for the next publication of a book, they can do that, and they understand that they're not paying for that book, which has already been offered, but their donation will pay for the publication of more books. But nobody's checking. If you want to make a donation of any sort, you make it. If you don't, then you don't. It's up to you. But the books are given out for free distribution. And this has also been happening here, which is a wonderful thing. It's a very sincere way of helping many people to come in contact with the Dharma. Because even like in Asia, many people go to the temple more or less just as tourists or out of curiosity, and then they wander past this stall which has all these books and says, please take one, and so they pick it up, and then they're stuck on a train and they think, oh, I've got that book, let's read it, and they open it up, and there they are. And of course, there are all these podcasts and YouTubes and all this sort of thing nowadays for propagating the Dharma. But the real way to bring Dharma into your society is to embody it, to become it, so that it's not our words but our actions that people will notice. If within society, within your family, within your workplace, we are sincerely trying to become Dharma practitioners, really trying to cultivate patience and kindness and friendliness and politeness, and, as well as a certain level of wisdom and understanding and compassion and all these qualities which, we have been going through in these last few days. If we really try to bring all that onto the path and embody that in our daily lives, then people notice. And they get interested. What are you doing? Really, when your family especially starts saying, you're much nicer nowadays. What are you doing? What's wrong with you? Maybe. When we genuinely are in a nice, natural way, not getting uptight about being little bodhisattvas, but really in a very natural way, are just really trying to be nicer people, and to develop the good heart, then people get curious. It doesn't mean that they are necessarily going to become Buddhists. That's not what is important. But what is important is that they begin to think, they start discussing things, and talking about things. Even, for example, when I was in England in the early 70s, I went back for a bit of time because I hadn't been back for 10 years or seen my mother and my family. And so they asked me to stay for a while. So I stayed for 6 months. But I felt that since I wasn't doing any Dharma activity, I should earn the money to go back to India. And so I went to the employment exchange. And they said, when was your last job? And I said, well, about 10 years ago. And I was in robes, of course. I don't know. And I said, yeah, I'd been in India, etc. And then they said, well, you're just the kind of person we're looking for. Why don't you come and work for the Department of Employment? So I ended up working for the Department of Employment. And I didn't say anything about being a Buddhist nun or anything, but people in the office began to, when they had any disputes in the office, they would come to me to ask how to resolve the disputes. Then they would come up with discussions on karma and rebirth. And the whole office would be involved in it, and it was very interesting because they all had ideas about it, which was interesting. That they really, actually, the most unlikely people actually had opinions on this. And, people began to get interested. I wasn't saying anything. But, people would then say, well, what should we read? Do you have any advice? How do you meditate? And so forth. So the point is that if people see that, we are, fairly well balanced and then they start to get curious. And from their side, they want to know more. And so it's not a matter of having to go out and propagate the Dharma, but of embodying means that, we become it. And then, therefore, people are attracted. Because many, many people are really searching for something, some meaning in their lives. And without people, having to be card-carrying Buddhists, a lot of Buddhist techniques can really help. So that, as we know, many, many people are practicing mindfulness nowadays, practicing meditation, including all sorts of people. In India, with the Vipassana courses of Goenka, the majority of people going for these courses in India are Hindus and Muslims. Not Buddhists, because the Buddhists are a small minority in India. And also Christians. I mean, one nunnery convent that in South India, you cannot enter the novitiate until you have done 2 Goenka courses. And all the nuns are doing Goenka meditation. So the thing is that a lot of techniques which we have would be very helpful for other people if they had them. But the way to get people interested is just by being. Then it attracts people. People come and they ask, what can I read? How can I meditate? The most unlikely people ask how to meditate. And just very simple things. Or people come with their problems, how to deal with it. And one can help them from a Dharma perspective. So each one of us, the Buddha said, just before, he said after his enlightenment, in Bodh Gaya, then Mara represents all those forces which are opposed to enlightenment. It's sort of like a Buddhist Satan. Shaitan. Yeah? And he came over and over in the Buddha's life. And the Buddha always said, I know you, Mara. And then Mara was completely disempowered. Right? He couldn't do anything. As soon as he's recognized, he loses his power. But anyway, straight after the Buddha, so don't think that once you get enlightened, there's no Mara. Because Mara comes throughout the Buddha's life, even just before he dies, and dialogues with him. So he came after the Buddha's enlightenment, and he said, okay, you've done what you have to do. Now you can go into Mahaparinirvana. Just leave. And the Buddha said, no, I first have to establish the fourfold Sangha. Fully ordained monks, fully ordained nuns, lay men, lay women. When this fourfold Sangha is studying and practicing and propagating the Dharma, then it will be time to leave. And throughout his ministry. 45 years he was wandering around in North India. Again and again and again, he said, and also just before he died, he said the same thing again. It is very essential for the stability of the Dharma and the well-being of all beings that this fourfold Sangha is established. The fourfold Sangha being monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen. And that they all should be studying, practicing, and propagating the Dharma. He never said anywhere that only monks should do this. He said this is the responsibility of the Mahasangha, the great community. The great community includes everybody who has taken refuge. And that it's their responsibility, not just to support the monks, but themselves to study, practice, and spread the Dharma. So this, I think, in this time is very interesting, because through Buddhist history, mostly it has been monks who have upheld the Dharma because they have time. I mean, this is the real reason. I mean, they have time, and they're not involved with family. They are not involved in other jobs, a profession to support themselves. They're supported by the lay devotees. And so they have infinite time for study and practice and to then give out the Dharma. So throughout Buddhist history, in all Buddhist countries, mostly, gradually, more and more, the power and the knowledge of the Dharma became concentrated more and more and more in the monasteries. And so, when, for example, in India, the huge Buddhist monasteries, such as the universities, the Buddhist universities like Nalanda, Vikramasila, Takshila, where all the monks went to study, when they were destroyed in the 12th and 13th centuries, effectually that was the end of Buddhism in India, because the lay people didn't know. Everything was in the hands of the monks. All the ritual, all the learning, all the practice. Kill the monks, and there's nothing. Whereas Hinduism, like Judaism, why? His Holiness the Dalai Lama invited many rabbis to Dharamshala. There's a book called The Jew in the Lotus. Right, so he invited these rabbis because he wanted to understand how it was that the Jewish people who have been in exile for 2,000 years nonetheless keep so strongly their sense of identity. Because he could see that the Tibetans were very quickly, the younger Tibetans were very quickly going abroad and assimilating themselves and losing their contact with especially their religion and their culture. And so he wanted to understand from the rabbis how it was that despite all the persecutions and being far from your country for so many, for 2 millennia, you had nonetheless kept such a strong sense of identity and a connection with your belief system. Of course, the rabbis wanted to know how it was that so many nice, good little Jewish boys and girls were becoming Buddhists. So they had a different agenda. But I think one of the reasons why the one of the reasons that they were able to keep their identity and their religion alive was rather like with the Hindus also, and is with a very weak point with the Buddhists, because so much of the ritual is in the home. So much of the festivals and the ritual observances was within the family. And you couldn't kill that off, you know? So, for example, during the Islamic invasions of the 12th and 13th century in India, they killed the monks, they burned the monasteries, that was the end of Buddhism. But they couldn't do that to the Hindus, because even if you destroyed their temples, much of their ritual was happening within the family. So they just quietly kept it going, and they couldn't uproot it. And likewise with the Jewish people, when they destroyed the temple, never mind, any room would do as a synagogue. And you can, you have so much which goes on within the family. You can't destroy that. So nowadays, for the first time in practically 2,000 years, Buddhism is coming back more to the original vision, I think, of the Buddha, which was, it's gone unbalanced the other way now. Before it was unbalanced in favor of the monks. Now it is the time for the lay people, because all over the Buddhist world, not just in the West, but also in Asia, for the first time, lay people are highly educated, often much more educated than the monks. So that means that you can read a Dharma book and understand it, especially if you have the commentaries going with it. You can go off on retreats. Many of the teachers are lay people. And many of the Dharma groups are completely run by laymen and lay women, for laymen and lay women. And this is actually the first time this has happened. It's very interesting to see where it's going to go. I think it does need to be balanced by having a more strong monastic core, but undoubtedly everywhere, and also in Asia, in the more educated advanced nations of Asia, like Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, and so forth, and in China. Now the Dharma is being held by the laymen, the laywomen, the upasaka, the upasika. As the Buddha said. So therefore, it is your responsibility now to really integrate Dharma with your daily life and become an example of the Dharma life well lived. That will bring a lot of interest. Especially in a country which is very challenging like this, you need to be a light. Each one. It's not anymore that your role is simply to support other people. Your role is yourselves to embody your ideals. You are all intelligent, you are all educated, you can study, you can practice. So these are very interesting times for the Buddha Dharma. The Buddha Dharma is really changing all over the world, also in Asia. And it will be interesting to see where it goes now. I think it has a very strong message which is very practical and which can be very, very helpful for many, many people. So, yes, it will be interesting in the next 50 years to see what happens.
Not a danger, though, of it becoming diluted, because when it spreads out into the lay world in too much, then it becomes mixed, and especially today with New Age and things like that, it just becomes a hodgepodge.
Yes, so he's saying, the danger is that it becomes diluted, and often it gets mixed with other approaches like New Age and so forth, and that, maybe the depth of study, the depth of practice could be lost for just a general, kind of feel-good aspect. So this is why I say we also need a monastic core, because I think it's important not to have people in our midst who are dedicated totally only to study and practice, and also who embody the Buddhist principles of renunciation and contentment, and simplicity of life. An ideal sangha will embody that, and so that even if everybody is not ready to be renounced, at least they can see within their midst, within a well-disciplined celibate order, that people can live a life of renunciation and simplicity and still be very happy. Without, people have now the idea that if you don't have intimate relationships and all these other things, that somehow or other you're going to end up really weird and frustrated, and all this, a lot of emphasis now on people who have, gone astray, and not appreciating the vast majority who have benefited. So this is a problem in all Buddhist countries also, because, if we don't have people who really have walked to the end of the path as exemplars, then, as you say, it all becomes rather superficial. But nonetheless, even in the best of times, the majority of people were just cultivating the path in accordance with their own capabilities. And so I just think it will be interesting to see what happens. Because some lay people also become very good scholars, because we are educated already. Practitioners, some are doing 6-year, 9-year, 12-year retreats. Many Westerners are doing long-term retreats. You don't hear about them, but they're there. And also recently we heard of a number of Western practitioners who, when they died, stayed in what is called tukdam for several days, even a week or more. Tukdam is a state of when, at the time of death, then the very subtle consciousness, which is called the clear light nature of the mind, at the time of death, we all absorb into that very subtle consciousness, but normally, because we don't recognize it, we lose it immediately and go into the intermediate state. But people who have realized the clear light nature of the mind during their lifetime, at the time of death, when that appears very strongly, they recognize it, and the very subtle mind, they rest in their very subtle mind. And so the outer appearance is that the body does not go into rigor mortis, it doesn't decay. Usually they're sitting up in meditation. If they've been lying down, they sit them in meditation, and they stay like that. The brain is dead. They're dead. But it's just that intermediate state between actually the consciousness is still within the body. And so if you feel that here at the center of the chest it's still warm. And when such practitioners die in hospital, of course, and their attendants say, don't move the body, leave it. For example, the previous Karmapa. And the doctors were told to just feel here. And of course they couldn't explain it, but they're dead. Why are they warm here? Why is the body not going into rigor mortis? And so you can stay in that state for hours, days, even weeks. And if it's in weeks, then the body becomes, usually, even if they've been very sick and old, the body becomes more and more beautiful, and it gives off a very beautiful perfume. And people like to go in and just sit and meditate, because at that time the mind is in a state of total absolute realization. And so to meditate in the presence of that is very powerful. But anyway, I mean, now more and more Westerners are also dying in that state. They don't, usually talk about it much, but it's and recently somebody died in that state, and then when they they were cremating them, and the body went into, the iron, the electric oven, and then, they take it in and it burns up, and then they bring it out, and they brought it out, and the corpse was still there, untouched. And what? This was an elderly German man, I think. And so they told the Lama, and the Lama came and he did some rituals. And then he said, now you can burn the body. And so then they sent it in again, and then when it came out, his eyes and tongue and heart had not been burned, which is a sign of the blessings of body, speech, and mind. So what I'm saying is just that Westerners can do it too. Don't give up. Don't give up. It's not just those, guys up in the Himalayan peaks. We all have that potential. We all have that potential. And there are many very sincere practitioners who are indeed absorbed in very profound practices. And it works. So, anyway, it's just that the nature of the mind is nature of the mind. It's not Tibetan or Israeli or anything. It's just the nature of the mind.
What can we do as a group, not as individuals, to make sure that things don't go to the superficial side?
I think it's very, for example, in Singapore, where many people, originally the more educated people, looking at Buddhism and seeing it as just a very, something you go to the temple and you offer incense, and so they thought this is very old-fashioned, and so they were more and more either becoming secular or Christian, and because that was more Western. And now they are many young people and professionals and so forth are coming back to the Buddha Dharma, and what they are doing is what you should be doing, and which you are doing, which is to form groups where you study a text and discuss it. From time to time you can invite someone from outside to explain it, but basically, because we're all educated, we can usually understand if we have a commentary. And to practice together, to arrange times, like maybe a week's retreat, 10-day retreat, and so forth, and support each other. The Buddha really praised very much good companionship. He said it was the whole of the spiritual path, was especially in a society which is going in one direction. Remember, we're out of harmony with the society. So we need to be in harmony with each other at least, and keep going support each other. And so definitely it's very important that you form groups, larger groups, smaller groups, that come together regularly and study and discuss, meditate together, and encourage each other. Because on our own, it's a very lonely journey. And sometimes people get very discouraged because society, as the Buddha said, if we are practicing the Dharma, we are swimming upstream when the rest of society is swimming downstream. I mean, he said that 2,500 years ago, so what did he say now? So in order not to be just a lonely little fish swimming up by yourself, it's important to have the support and encouragement of like-minded people. So really, it's very, very useful to be part of group. And as I say, the thing is that you're all highly educated, so you can study. It's not like in a traditional society where people didn't go to school. Therefore, when they came to study the text, every single word had to be spelled out for them because they couldn't understand it. You already have all that. You're already educated. Yes, of course, there are words which we need, concepts which we need explained. But nonetheless, because one is already educated, one can understand much more easily than in a traditional society where people didn't go to school. So there is no reason why one cannot take any text and study it, especially with commentaries, and understand it and then apply it. It's very important also to remember that first we study, then we think about it and try to understand it. That's the discussion part, where people discuss together and try to understand the concepts and how we could apply it. And then we apply it, And as I say, a Lama said to me, first we study, then we think about it, we reflect, then we become it. Right? We have to, once we've understood it and accepted, yes, that's good, then we have to integrate it. It's like food, first you prepare it, but then we have to eat it. Otherwise it doesn't really nourish us. If we just look at it and analyze it, but don't actually eat it. So yes, it's very good that you have Dharma groups and come together to support each other, to study, to practice. Definitely.
So don't go to a cave?
Even in Tibet, he says don't go to a cave. Even in Tibet, where every Dharma instruction started by leaving your home and going off into a cave, that's step number 1. Very few people actually did. Even the most devout normally would stay in a monastery, which was normally attached to their village. Some people are called to do intense practice and meditation, and if one is called and the circumstances arise, then of course that is wonderful. But it doesn't mean everybody has to do that. Never ever, even in somewhere like India or especially in Tibet, which was so set up for Dharma study and practice, even there, the amount of people who actually went off and spent significant amount of times in remote areas was still quite small. And that was in the optimum country where everybody would support you if you wanted to do that. So, of course, if that is a very strong calling and the circumstances allow it, that's really wonderful. But it doesn't mean that everybody has to do that, because it would be impractical, and also it wouldn't be helpful. Some people are called for that, but not everybody is. And it's maybe in this part of where we are going, what we need to do is quite the opposite. And that's how we are going to learn, and that's how we're going to develop. We're all very different, and it's not that we have to try to pretend to be something that we're not. We're not all Milarepas. Even in Tibet, Milarepa was a very rare phenomenon. weren't you? That's why he's such a hero, because he embodied, the ideal, but that the ideal for most people remain just an ideal. So the very last verse says the supreme benefit is a mind that turns towards the Dharma. So really, this is the point. It's very easy, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, and especially I think for Tibetans more than people coming from outside, but also maybe from everybody, to get caught up in all the external manifestations of devotion. I mean, there is a story which is told about at the Jokang, which is the main temple in Lhasa. And then there was an old man there who was doing prostrations. And then the Lama said, "It's very good you're doing prostrations, but why don't you practice Dharma?" So, all right. So then he started circumambulating. Well, it's very good you're circumambulating, but how about practicing Dharma? So then he sat there saying his mantras and twirling his prayer wheel. The same thing. Very good to say mantras, but how about practicing Dharma? And he said, well, what? Here I am prostrating, circumambulating, saying mantras. Isn't that practice? And he said, genuine practice is to turn the mind towards the Dharma. And that's the point. It is very easy to get caught up in outer expressions. But is our mind turned towards the Dharma? In other words, is the Dharma sitting right at the center of our being, right in the middle of our life? So this question of turning the mind towards the Dharma means that we really do understand this is our precious human rebirth, that we shouldn't waste it, that now it has come due to causes and conditions which we ourselves created from the past. At this moment we are in this very unique position where we have the freedom and the opportunity for practice. You are living in a country where you are free to think what you want to think, to practice what you want to practice. You have the education to be able to read the Dharma and understand it. You are not in a repressive society where you are not allowed to think for yourself. You can think for yourself. This is, even in the world today, is very rare. And especially for women. There are still many countries in the world where women are not educated, or only educated at a very primary level. And where people are not allowed to think what they want to think, believe what they want to believe. And you are not in a desperate situation where all the time you are just worrying about where your next meal is coming from. You all have more than enough to sustain you. So you have Dharma teachers. You have a Dharma community. Probably you've never had it so good. And if we lose this opportunity, if we get distracted from that, it's very unlikely to come back again. And so recognizing that every action of body, speech and mind in itself is creating moment to moment to moment our future. That what happens to us now is a result of past actions, but moment to moment we are weaving the tapestry of our future. So we have to be careful. Careful of our mind. Because from our mind comes our speech and our actions. That everything is impermanent. Moment to moment. We never know what's going to happen next. Things change continually. And at the end, we're all going to die. Whoever we are, we're all going to die. The one thing we have in common is that for sure, the one thing sure is that we're going to die. Nothing else is sure. Whether we take the next breath or not, we don't know. We might have a heart attack. But that we're all going to die, we know. So, fine, no problem. You know, we get recycled. It's very ecologically sound. But we need to be recycled into something which is useful. And so, therefore, it's very important that we make use of this life so that we can die without regrets, knowing that we use this life to benefit ourselves, to benefit others, and we didn't waste it. And so thinking like that and recognizing how precious this opportunity is and not to waste it and to really put the Dharma at the center of our lives is meaning to turn the mind to the Dharma. That everything is a Dharma practice. If we're mindful, if we're clear, if our hearts are beginning to open up, then everything, there's nothing which is not capable of being taken on the path. And therefore, when we face all these problems and when we face good things, and if we have the equanimity, then that is turning the mind towards the Dharma. And so that is, he says, that's the greatest benefit. It's the highest benefit for all of us, for ourselves and for others, is to have a mind which is saturated with the Dharma. Not something which we just do when we've got a bit of time left over. But everything. It's like having leaven or yeast in a heavy piece of dough. You know, we mix in the yeast with the dough and it all lightens up. You don't throw the dough away. Then we can cook it and it becomes very delicious. We can eat it, it's nourishing. But otherwise it's just this heavy lump. And so our lives without the Dharma perspective just become heavy and meaningless. But once we have a Dharma perspective, it becomes vast and open and spacious and includes all beings. So, you know, really, it's very important to integrate the Dharma in our daily lives. Because if we just leave it to those times when, you know, we're doing formal practice or when we're reading Dharma books, and the rest of the time with our family and at work and, you know, pursuing our various interests, then our mind just goes off in all directions and we completely forget about the Dharma. It doesn't work. And then people blame the Dharma. Well, I tried, but it didn't work. but, you know, it's like a medicine. You have to keep taking it, you know, and it can cure our ills, but we have to follow the remedy. The Buddha set down the Noble Eightfold Path, but we have to walk the path. If we don't walk it, then it's not going to work. And one of the stages on the Eightfold Path is right livelihood, which is interesting because in the Eightfold Path, one of the sections is right action. But apart from right action, the Buddha mentions right livelihood, which means using our work, whatever it is, as part of our Dharma practice. And to not only have, of course, a profession which doesn't cause any harm and keeps us within ethical boundaries, but also taking our livelihood as part of our Dharma practice. So everything is included here. I keep saying it, but it's very important to remember that in our daily life, that everything is a practice. Moment to moment to moment to moment. Then something shifts inside. Otherwise it won't work. Guru Rinpoche said that our ethical conduct should be as finely sifted as flour, barley flour. Here's the Tibet. Our conduct, our ethical conduct should be as finely sifted as barley flour, but our view should be as vast as the skies. So it means that our mind should be open and spacious. And at the same time, we should be very meticulous with our conduct, moment to moment to moment. So I think that should keep you going. It's very important to realize that this is a way of life. It's not just something for Shabbat. This is something for every day. Every day is Shabbat. It's a way of life.
Just in some text, it's translation for the Dharma word is also for phenomena.
Ah.
So
yeah, but that's not what it means here.
But is there any connection with this livelihood and
well, the dharmas then means like the very minute, like you might say, atoms of phenomena when they are reduced. They reduce down to dharmas. And also mental phenomena, meaning each mind moment that arises like that, swimming along, those are also dharmas. So that's what it means, but that's not what he's talking about here. Here he's talking about dharma in the sense of the way of living in accordance with how things really are.
May I ask, according to your opinion, do you think one can practice the dharma without becoming a Buddhist?
Do I think that people can practice Dharma without becoming a Buddhist? It depends. I mean, yes, of course you can practice Dharma without becoming a Buddhist. Certain aspects of the Dharma. I mean, many people are practicing being mindful. Ethical conduct has nothing to do with being a Buddhist. It's just about being a good human being. compassion, loving kindness, and many of these qualities can help us become better human beings. So, of course, I mean, the techniques are offered to everybody. And if one practices, one will definitely become a better human being. It's not necessary to join the club. But I think as far as very deeper practices and very deeper commitment from a Buddhist perspective, it is necessary to make that complete commitment to the three jewels, to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, so that you say, yes, that is the path I'm going to follow, and that is the because otherwise, if we're not careful, we take a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of the other, and put it together to make our own little minestrone. But it tends then to be rather superficial if we're not careful. Anyway, sorry, I've just been reminded that we have to make a presentation. Sorry. Yes. Okay, yes, dedication first. Let's get dedicate. In Buddhism, it's considered that every time we perform any kind of activity which is considered positive, called meritorious, if we don't dedicate it to all sentient beings, then it's even if it's a lot of good actions, it's like the water in this cup. The results will come, but that is emptying the cup. And so pretty soon the cup is empty, and that's the end of that, the results of that merit. But if we dedicate this merit to all sentient beings, then it's like pouring that water into the ocean, and it never runs dry. Chancho senjore moje moje banan jeju chi che wanya ba me ba yong gone gondo pe wa shu jampa pa we jita jampa dong kundu sambo de ande shinde de da kunji je so da lo chinge wa de da tanje ra ngo tu sun she bi jawa tan chi ji ngo wa kan la jo du nga pa de da gi ge we sa wa de kon chang sampo chu chi ra tu ngo wo ji